Usually takes a couple of seconds for everybody to show up. So once we start to plateau, I'll get everybody started. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this Workforce Wednesday webinar, Resume Building and Applicant Tracking System, What You Need to Know. Today's presenters, I will be your moderator for today, Antonio Gomez. I think that we have a question. It looks like whoever it was lowered their hand. But my name is Antonio Gomez. I work for the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support. I will be your moderator for today. Our presenters for today are Jordan Johnson from the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support and Daniel Mariscal. I apologize if I mispronounced your name. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's close enough. Antonio, it's Mariscal.
Oh, perfect. I apologize.
No
Hispanic, I should
worries.
have known that. Just gone for the Hispanic pronunciation. Before we get started, I'm going to go through some housekeeping. I'll be your moderator and technical support. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I can help you out. Please hold all questions until the Q&A portions of the webinar. They will either be throughout or at the very end, depending on the speaker. This webinar will be offering closed captioning, so feel free to turn that on. We'll also be recording the webinar, and that'll be available on the Illinois Workforce Academy in about 48 hours, along with these slides as well. Before we get started, I'm going to get started with some polls. So the first one is, where is your local workforce area or your local area? Sorry, I gotta find my polls here. All right, and I'll have that up for a little bit. And then for anybody that doesn't know, LWIA stands for Local Workforce Innovation Area. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end that poll and share the results. It is not really showing the results. I apologize. So we're going to move on to the next poll just for the sake of time. So this is, which partner do you represent? I'm going to go ahead and launch that one. Title one, Adult Dislocated Worker and Youth Programs. Title two, Adult Education, Family Literacy. Title three, Wagner Pizer Employment Service. Title four, Vocational Rehab, or others. All right. We go ahead and end this poll and we'll share the results. It looks like there's a lot of Title One, so we're happy to see you all. Happy to see everybody who's on here. Without further ado, I think we can go ahead and get started. So, Jordan, if you'd like to go ahead and kick us off.
Yeah, so super excited for today. Just a little bit of background. I have about 3 years experience as a career counselor and about 2 years working in with an adolescent kind of life coach position before this. I've always kind of been interested in uh, career counseling and since high school. So it's also kind of something I do in my free time. So just a brief background on kind of my experience in this before diving into it. If you want to go out to the presentation outline slide. Yeah. So really some of the big ideas that I'm going to tackle and throughout today's session is what an applicant tracking system is and kind of what it does. And then kind of doing a resume workshop about based on kind of this ATS system and how to make a resume friendly for that. So along the way, I'll share some other resume tips, and then we'll do kind of a live demo of a really cool resume building tool that's available for free via WorkNet and the Skills First platform. And Daniel will kind of walk us through that. Next slide. So ATS is what I'll be using for applicant tracking system. So really, it's used by employers to really save time in the recruitment and screening of applicants for job openings. It's an automated system. So when I know there's a lot of complaints when people are filling out online forms, like, hey, why are you asking for my resume? And then I have to fill out these form fields that say the exact same thing that my resume says. That's because you're putting your information into this applicant tracking system that is going to kind of scan all of the information. And it doesn't always do that the greatest with like a Word doc or a PDF or a Google Sheets file. And so sometimes the employer will just have you load it straight into their system, which makes more work for the job applicant. So if you ever see duplication of things like that, it's probably because it's going into one of these systems. These are really designed to filter out underqualified or unqualified applicants based on the employer's minimum requirements for the role. So if they have a role that requires a high school diploma, if someone's filling out applications and doesn't put in that they have a high school diploma, then it's designed to automatically weed that out. And it kind of, for all the applications it gets, it doesn't necessarily put it in a pile where no one sees it, but it does kind of give it a ranking system and moves it lower to the pile based on some of the things that it's looked for. So some of the things, it primarily looks for keywords. So it's looking for degrees, it's looking for specific credentials or skills, whether it's technical skills like a welding or a programming language, or maybe it's looking for more general keywords like customer service or maybe years of experience, and it's scanning dates that are on the resume, like how long have you worked or how long have you worked in this kind of role. And then obviously with many other things that are in technology, it's been kind of made more robust and will continue evolving with artificial intelligence, AI. With previously, usually employers would just say, hey, these are kind of the keywords we are looking for in the applications. So like that education level, customer experience, technical skills, and it would just kind of scan the documents for those keywords. But now with AI, they can do some more complex things where, as it evolves, and they keep metrics, some of the bigger companies might keep track of like, hey, over the last year, we noticed that you hired applicants who had all these 3 or 4 traits. And so AI can look for not just keywords, but things that share in common with other people that have made it all the way through to the hiring offer, and start also ranking scores based on previous performance and some factors that have been the same between all of those hiring. So when this is the first step in the hiring process for most people, is filling out a resume online and doing that job application, it's really crucial to have a good resume to even stand a chance at kind of moving on to that interview step in the process. So that's why, to me, this first step is a really crucial step. Next slide. So again, we talked about it searches for keywords and qualifications that align with the job. Some documents are more ATS friendly than others. So just because the information is on the page, it doesn't mean when you attach it on the job application and then the machine is scanning through it, it doesn't always pull that information out as well on some ways and some kinds of documents than others. It does rank those based on a ranking. So there's kind of people who move to the top and move to the bottom, but it's kind of all in the same pool. But it just kind of does some of that ranking before a human even gets to look at it. So when they do dive in, they're like, hey, I'm going to look at the top 20% of applicants and just save time that way. And so the HR person will then take those top, however, top 20 ranked resumes and start skimming those first before they move on down the list. Next slide. So the source is on here, but basically who uses applicant tracking systems? 70% of large or enterprise level. If you move to like anyone who's on the NASDAQ or anything, Fortune 500 companies, that actually goes up to over 99% of companies. Walmart, Home Depot, places like that, Google, Apple, they're all going to, 99% of them, more than 99% use these applicant tracking systems. And obviously a large majority of other large but not that large companies will as well. But also something to keep in mind is small and medium-sized companies. So small shops that are in your town, maybe 100 or less workers, don't really see the need, maybe don't get enough applications to warrant the purchase price of an ATS. So if you're working with individuals who are having a hard time getting in, thinking about where they're applying might be something to be part of the conversation. So if they're applying to all these big names like Walmart, Home Depot, medical centers with 20 locations, and they're not getting past that initial resume screening, maybe you tell them to apply to smaller companies because they're going to be less likely to use that automated system to push them through. And they might get a better chance at being seen by a human being and move on through that process. Next slide. So some fun facts is that even after going through the ATS, let's say you're in that top percentage of when HR actually looks at it, that person only spends about 6 seconds just skimming that resume. They're looking for bullet points. They're looking for like 3 or 4 things like, hey, minimum education. Do they have work experience? Do they have, XYZ skill? It's kind of a yes or no, and then it kind of goes into different piles. Again, HR is recruiting for a lot of different roles at the company, so they don't have a lot of time to just sit and mull over, the nuances of each person's application and potential. They're just looking, hey, minimum qualifications, yes or no pile. So something to keep in mind is that the more visible the company is, the more competition there is. So usually the larger companies, are going to attract more applications because they're more visible to more people, which makes it harder to go in. So if you're ever looking at like corporate roles, like I live in a town where we have State Farm and Country Financial, for that kind of level of corporate role, or if we're looking at Google or Salesforce or something like that, there's often for one job posting over 200 applications for a single opening. And so when you're looking at it like that, it's not to say that you have no chance of getting it, but you obviously have more competition in that pool versus a local business that garners, 10 or 15 applications for one job opening. So just again, something to keep in mind as you're guiding yourself or other people through this process. And the rule of thumb is still true, even in everything that I'm seeing now, is that the majority of jobs are not advertised online. They're made through word of mouth connections, referrals, and things like that. So as much as the resume is important, at the end of the day, your social capital is probably the biggest thing to hone in and take advantage of as much as possible, because more jobs come out of word of mouth and having people vouch for you at different roles or connect you with different people than just blind applying to 100 jobs online. So stressing that element of this process as well in the job seeker. Next slide. So for the building resume section, we're going to kind of cover formatting, keywords, bullet points, and then I'll touch on references and some tips for some areas that I see very commonly having done resume reviews, and some pointers on some specific things that have kind of come up through my experience doing that as well. Next slide. So really the goal of this formatting and then this tool that we'll be using later is really to just eliminate as many variables as possible in the job application. You obviously can't control HR or the company or some of the factors that they're looking for. What we're looking to do is control the variables that we are able to remove as many barriers as possible to getting that first interview. And so that's really the goal of all of this, is to give us as best as chance as possible to move forward in the process. So with that, not all resume templates are equal. So a lot of people use Microsoft Word. It has resume templates built into it. And while it looks nice, it's easy to fill in the information. When we get to that ATS, again, when it starts scanning that, a lot of times there's graphics, there's different colors, things are in tables, and it has a hard time pulling out the right information for the right fields. And so it just kind of gets all messy when ATS tries to extract that information. And that's why those Microsoft Word templates, graphics, pictures, or charts, or anything that's really tables and columns, anything that's not really just text or bullet point, it starts to kind of get in the way of extracting that information. Next slide. So, since HR only spends about 6 seconds looking at that resume, more information is not better. We don't want a super long resume. At most, you want it to be 2 pages. You also want it to not be so full of information that you can't tell when one section starts and another section ends. You want it to have kind of a natural progression where, again, in 6 seconds, I can clearly see where education, work history, volunteer experience is, or any other, skills are, and be able to hit that in a couple seconds without having to think about it. The more someone has to think about what they're reading, the less likely you are to move forward. Again, because this process is very short in its initial stages. So you want that mixture of readability and information. Each line on the resume should offer something unique. Something I've seen a lot on resumes is if someone's had, say, like 3 different food service jobs, listing the same skill sets of doing the same thing at all 3 jobs, that's accurate. But as the HR person, that doesn't really tell me new information because I've already read that the first time. So when I see it the second or the third or the fourth time, I'm like, okay, there's nothing new to see here. I can just ignore this. So you really want each thing on there to add a new value, a new point of interest, a new angle to highlight the skill set of the individual that you're trying to get this job. And then, yeah, sections should be intuitive, easy to distinguish. Again, we want to remove as many barriers as possible for the reader, make it super easy for them to tell where everything is just by a quick glance. Next slide. So resumes should be 1 to 2 pages in length. The quality of prompts and jobs are more important than what's listed. So again, I would recommend for when you're doing job applications is to have a different job application for each role that you're applying for, or at least each category of role that you're applying for. So if you have someone who's applying to maybe different fields or maybe different mechanic jobs, maybe they're applying to some HVAC things and then some industrial mechanic jobs and then maybe some landscaping jobs. Those are 3 different things that have some overlap in the skill sets and maybe the prerequisites to join those. But they're also going to have some pretty unique things that the other 2 categories aren't going to have. So being able to tailor your resume for the target of where you're trying to go is really important. Again, when you're skimming, that everything on there is relevant and super pertinent and not just like a generic, hey, I'm a hard worker, or, I've done, mechanical labor for 5 years without giving like specifications on what kind of labor you've done. So quality is more important than quantity. And then something that I've run into just working with individuals, especially who are maybe starting a career path or an education path and kind of transitioning into their first maybe long-term career path instead of just jumping from similar roles, is that if there's a lot of short-term or overlapping jobs, thinking of maybe some creative ways to put those entries or maybe selectively leave out roles. So I'll give some examples there. Is that a lot of students that I worked with had multiple employment at the same time. However, they never had a work gap between all of that. And so they would have like maybe a main job and a side job. And so really on the resume, it's important that you have as consistent a work history as possible. And those side jobs might have been, cleaning someone's house or babysitting, but that didn't add new value to maybe their full-time employment. And so sometimes, and for the sake of consolidating and making things easy to read, we didn't have to list every single job that they ever did. And so weighing that out and obviously letting the individual kind of choose what they think represents them best and where they're trying to go is part of that conversation. But thinking of, hey, you worked here for a month and then you quit and you joined this other job. Why did you do that? It's like, oh, I got fired. Maybe we just never put that job on there in the first place. So the HR person isn't saying, hey, I see that you only worked here for 1 month or 3 months. Why is that? Um, unless somewhere on their job application process it says list every single job you've been at in the past 5 years, you can choose what is or is not on your resume. And so sometimes that's advice I've given too. Next slide. I would recommend using a chronological format. So really just what that's going to be is when you're listing each of the different areas, education, work experience, you start with the newest at the top, and then you go progressively to oldest at the bottom. And so that's the standard, I would say, traditional way of doing resumes. I would say that ATS systems almost always use this method. And I would say also, again, when looking at the reader's experience, it makes the most sense to have kind of newest to oldest because that's the most normal way of formatting a resume. That's what the ATS system uses. And just kind of like psychologically, a really easy way to process information as well. So I would highly recommend a chronological format. There are some other ones that are more skills based. If you have some work history that is maybe more spotty or maybe no work history at all and you have to be a little more creative, there are other templates there, but whenever possible, I would suggest using a chronological format. And then arrange the sections of the resume based on the significance to the employer. So when there again, there's multiple ways you could arrange your resume. For say someone who's a new grad out of maybe associate's or bachelor's degree, they're probably going to put their education section that lists their degree at the top of the resume because that's the most relevant thing that they have to offer to the employer for maybe starting a new career path, is that they just got their bachelor's or their associate's degree in blank. And then they might have their work experience or specific skills like programming or welding under that, and then their work experience, which is probably going to be general employment, but not anything specific to the field that they're trying to get into. Whereas someone who has 10 or 15 years experience in a field, maybe healthcare, is trying to move up to a supervisor role, they might want to put their work experience at the top first because their 15 years of healthcare experience is going to be more relevant to the employer than their education they got 15, 20 years ago. So thinking about where you're trying to go and what's going to be most important to the employer in evaluating whether or not you're a good candidate is also something to consider. It looks like we have. So how do you recommend a career changer tailor the resume to the new job they want when they lack experience in the new field? So for example, someone who is a CNA wants to be a business management consultant. Okay, so here in a second, there will be a section on objective statements, and then I will cover that question kind of during that section. But that is a good question. Next slide. So this is just an example of a template that's going to look similar to the tool that we use later, but all the information, there's clear headers. We're using the same font all the way through for the same pieces of information. So everything is bold on the left is kind of the name of the role or the degree. The headers are centered and underlined and bolded. All the dates are farthest to the right. And then everything is the same format. So again, there's plenty of white space to show gaps in between all of those sections, but there's also enough information that it's useful to the reader as well. So kind of balancing that information to white space so it's clear, easy to read, but not too cluttered. Next slide. So when we're looking for keywords as far as the actual content to put in the resume, I highly recommend using the job postings or, a general job posting if there's not one specific one you're looking at as kind of the study guide, both for building your resume, but also for interview prep. So what I'm going to do is just share something really quick, just as an example from a job listing I pulled off WorkNet. And so for this job role, it's a physical therapy aide. There's the information at the top. But as you scroll down, there's kind of the overview of it. But what I would say is once you start getting into like responsibilities and things like that, and there's these bullet points, use these bullet points as study guides. And also pull from this for the keywords of things you want to highlight in your resume. Again, we're writing the resume for the job we want to get, not all the old stuff we've done. We're trying to get to this new location. So we want to use the language that they're using. If it's important enough to put in a job listing, it's probably important to the HR representative as well. So when we're looking at that, it's like, oh, we need someone who greets and interacts with patients warmly. So we need someone who's hospitable, customer service, um, intake and registration. So if we have any experience doing something like that, use those words in your own resume in the bullet points. If you have any cleaning experience, people might say, oh, all I was a janitor. I have nothing in common with a physical therapist. Well, according to this bullet point here, having experience cleaning treatment areas well is actually a very relevant skill. So, make sure that you're highlighting that, not discounting that previous experience. And then being able to assist people in exercises and support. So that would probably also have some physical capabilities to it. So maybe the person did outside labor all day. So like they would be well versed in being able to assist people physically throughout the day because they're used to doing, exercises throughout the day. So that's just a short example of ways that you can use a job listing to kind of use it as a cheat sheet or study guide of what's important to include on the resume. And also you can use these bullet points and frame them as a question for interview prep. So, so for this bullet point, we could say, it says promote an efficient patient intake and registration process and help with timely scheduling. So an interview question might look like, hey, tell me about a time where you had to do intake or registration and how you helped supervisory staff in that process. And it's kind of taking that bullet point and turning it into a question and using that as a practice question that might come up if they make it to the interview. And Antonio, yeah. I think we're on slide 18.
Does that look right?
It's on the presentation mode.
Oh, that sucks. Sorry, let me. All right, is that better?
Yep, awesome, thank you.
Cool. Thank you so much. Sorry.
So I'm full disclosure, I am not an English major. I am very bad at describing this, and it's still something I struggle with even when I write now. But I kind of know it when I see it, and that's why I included these links. So you can go to it. They explain it much better than I do. But basically, when you're writing your bullet points describing under each job that you had, what you did at that job, it's really important to use active language because it's more engaging to the audience and also just kind of shows ownership of how you took control in those situations and what you did. So starting each bullet point with an action verb, managed 25 employees, handled 50 boxes an hour, maintained cleanliness of the facility daily, coordinated with 3 other staff members. Kind of just saying right off the bat, we're diving straight into the thing that I did. So I would highly recommend looking at those links. They can explain it much better than I can, but opening with that action verb is a really important piece to grab the reader's attention. Next slide. Also, talking about keywords, using AI as a tool, using tools like Microsoft Copilot, if you have Microsoft Edge or maybe other Microsoft tools, you might have access to this. And so you can use that to identify keywords in a job listing. So that job listing that I just had previously, you could copy and paste that into Microsoft Copilot and say something like, hey, Copilot, could you tell me what keywords I should be sure to include in my resume based on this job listing? And then you can put the URL or the sample text from the job listing in the chat box, and it'll give some suggestions there. Obviously, it's not going to be perfect, but if you're struggling with where to start, it's a really helpful tool, especially if that is also honestly some of the same tools that is going to be scanning the resume anyway. So just thinking about that as another kind of tool in the bucket to use when you're writing these to make sure you didn't miss anything. And then the same thing can be done for LinkedIn profiles, which I highly recommend. And we'll touch that here in a little bit as well. Next slide. So for these bullet points, just again, kind of writing this based on experience, especially working with people who are career changers, starting somewhere new, or new to the resume process, or maybe you've never even written a formal like document resume that wasn't on Indeed or filling out a paper application, is to write where you're going, not where you've been. Your goal in the resume is to show that you're capable of doing the job on day one, or at least have the capacity to learn everything that you need to on day one. So as much as you want to show your previous work experience, you want to write those bullets to showcase how you're already ready for the role you're trying to get into. So using the job listing, like we talked about earlier, for guidance on what to focus on. So there's a lot of things every job has. We all have 20, 30, 50 things that we're all responsible for, but which are the 5 most important things to this role I'm trying to get into, and hone in on those. And so doing that is really important, and showing your skills in the context that you used them. So not just saying in a random list of skills, like a skills section is like customer service, friendly, quick learner, hard worker, on time, is that saying, hey, here's the context I use these skills. I worked hard working on a floor with 3 other people, and I was responsible for taking care of 20 clients as a CNA. Like that gives the reader a lot more context with why they should believe that you're a hard worker or believe that you're responsible. And so that's a really good thing to focus on for the bullets. Next slide. So kind of maybe a simple framework to think of how to organize this. And the link at the bottom is really helpful. They have a lot of really good career resources. I tend to be kind of collect a bunch of random links. So at the end of this presentation, there's going to be a bunch of links that I kind of picked that I've gathered over the years that have been helpful for me as a career counselor. So, if you feel like you want to go dig through some additional resources, those are kind of some of the ones that I've come back to over the years. But for bullets, focus on what did you do? What was the situation, problem, or challenge you were facing? So why should the reader even care about what you're writing at all? Like give them context for what was your mission? What was your goal? And then how did you do it? So, okay, now that we've identified what the thing is that you're responsible for doing, how did you carry that mission out? How did you accomplish those tasks? Did you use tools, equipment, computer programs? Be as specific as possible. So if it's not written down on the resume, the HR person can't read your mind. You're not sitting in the room with them to give them more information. Like, oh, what do you mean by this? Or I'm not sure what that means. Like you only get that one shot, that 6 seconds to really highlight that. So make sure it's as clear and specific as possible. So there's no question marks. Because again, HR isn't going to fill in the gaps, at least in your favor, if it's not listed. So be specific and fill in the gaps for them before they even have any questions. And then, are you working solo? Are you working with a team? Do you do both? That's something to do as well. Next slide. And then why? So why was the things that you were doing important? Or why was it important that you did them a certain way? How did they benefit your company? And if you have things that you can highlight as a good outcome, try to highlight how you changed the outcome or profitability or service of the place that you worked at. That's your responsibility and you can take credit for. Again, if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. HR isn't going to give you the benefit of the doubt. They're not going to guess. They're just going to go what's off the page. And if it's not in there, it didn't happen as far as they're concerned. So the next slide. So I have an example of a poor example and then a good example. So this person worked at a public health agency. They were an events coordinator. A poor example of writing what they did for this would be, they're responsible for organizing events and panels, and they made marketing. Those are true, but it leaves a lot of room for interpretation. As someone who has no access to this person, I don't get to ask them what, context, how often they did it, what it looked like. So if we go to the next slide, we can see a better example that's for the same role, but this person has gone out of their way to describe what they're doing. So they planned and coordinated panels on public health for audiences of 25 to 50 undergraduates bi-monthly. They identified and contacted health professionals in their community to participate in these panels. They created marketing and publicized these events through social media. And then the next step would also be maybe saying what social media platforms they used. And they also increased attendance because they were keeping track of attendance, and they can prove, like, because I did this, some of these programs attendance went up by 75%. So those are some kind of like a before and after of like a okay bullet point to an excellent bullet point, because it gives all those details and all that context. And like, if I was an HR person, the second slide is a much more impressive to me as a reader, even though it's literally the same person. So just kind of using that as an example. And again, that link breaks down the things more to it. There's a new question. Advise someone to differentiate between a doer and an achiever. Area under each employer is for achievements or not responsible for. Okay, so if there's no quantifiable data, like on this one, you can make your best judgments. So if not everything is easily measured, right? And so you can just say, hey, these are the things that I did. Here's the goals I was trying to achieve. And so if you don't have that specific numbers or quantified things, you don't have to put that in there. It's just, if you can prove anything that's hard and concrete and measurable, that's going to go a long way in the eyes of the person reading the resume, because it's objective. And it's not like, oh, aren't I great because I did all of these things? It's like, no, I can show you the paperwork where it's like, we did have 20 people and now we have 60. So it's kind of more of proving that you're not just making things up to sound good, because you have tangible evidence to point to. So when you can do that, great. If you can't, then just do your best to say, here are the things I did and why I did them and how I did them, and that's totally fine. Next slide. References. So unless it says in the application itself, references should actually be on their own separate document. So when we do the walkthrough, if we have time, we'll kind of make the resume and then maybe also make a references document. But the short version is, you should have a completely separate document that's just your references, and it should be formatted exactly the same way that your resume is. So it looks, when they're side by side to each other, like you print them out, they look like they're a matching set. Don't put references available upon request at the bottom of the resume. If they're going to ask for references every time, or even if they don't end up calling the references, they still want the list of references. And so It's just best practice to leave that off entirely, have a separate document completely ready to go from day one. Next slide. For who to list, references should always be from a professional capacity if possible. Again, I realize for some individuals this may be difficult. So this is kind of a tier list of first choice, second, third choice. So if a boss or supervisor, someone who oversees the employee directly and can speak to their work ethic and their time management and all of those things is obviously excellent if you know that they're going to be a good reference. A coworker or colleague is also good. Obviously there's some room for some more personal bias there, but at the end of the day, we don't want to like working with people who slack off either. So, they can still speak to your work ethic and things like that. And also, if maybe the person left a job a long time ago, they don't have any contacts, just putting a generic number for HR that says like, hey, I worked here from this time to this time, and can just be, it's still a professional reference. It's officially represented by the company, and if they don't have someone specific to reach out to, HR is a perfectly acceptable thing as long as they've kind of made that call. And again, with all of these, just reach out, say, hey, I'm planning on doing this. Is that okay? Just want to make you aware and getting that informed consent before people are putting people on their references list. Next slide. So if we don't have professional references, maybe they don't have any connections, they burn some bridges along the way, or they've just never had a professional job, then you could think of academic references. So thinking of instructors in the CNA, like a site director for the clinical site director is a really good reference for that. Or maybe an academic advisor or someone like that they've worked closely with, maybe someone in TRIA or some other things, or school counselor, someone who's still kind of in regular contact with the individual, knows their motivations, knows that they can show up on time, and can speak to certain elements of that professional behavior, even if they're not technically a boss or supervisor in that capacity. And then if there's that list doesn't warrant anyone, there's no professional resources, there's no academic or things like that, then you can put personal references, but only as an absolute, like you have to leave it empty or use personal references. So that would be like pastors, family, friends, things like that you could put down. However, I would say that that will probably disqualify you from a lot of jobs just at first glance. So if at all possible, use those first two. And or if there's a separate spot where if you want to put additional references in addition to your professional ones, sometimes there's a spot for that. If you're like, hey, I know this person who's worked at the university for a long time, but I never worked with them in a work setting, but I think they would hold some weight where I'm going. You could always add that if there's like an option for adding additional people to your references on top of those. I would say at least 3 professional references is the minimum to look for. Next slide. So this is just information. You can review the slides later, but basically this is the information, if at all possible, you want to include on your references. If you go to the next slide, there's an example of this filled out. So this was what it looked like. So name, current job title, not the job title they had when you worked with them, the work address, and then for email and personal phone, again, these people should be contacting their references before they're applying to jobs. I've had a couple students put me down as a job reference, but never told me that I was put down as a job reference. So I did give them a reference, but it was in the context of a career advisor and not as a professional. So if I had had the opportunity to talk to them, I could say, hey, here's the things that I'm comfortable giving you recommendations on, and here's some things that they might ask me that I don't have kind of that professional experience to speak to. And so they might have wanted to ask someone else, or other people might just straight up not answer because they're like, I don't know who's trying to call me. This is a strange number. and just leave them hanging. And so if a reference doesn't even answer the reply to someone's reaching out to their references, they might lose the job offer just because they're not responsive. And so make sure that your individuals are always reaching out to your references before they start this job search, really, because sometimes that back and forth takes a little while and you need those references when you apply to the job with your resume. Next slide. Skill section. So advice varies on what should go in this section. Generally, skills and context mean more than a random list of things. Consider using items that maybe could be more objectively measured. So if you know a certain programming language, if you have a certain kind of driving certification or welding certification, typing speed, that's what I would put in a skills section or a certification section. Next slide. I'm going to skim through these next ones just to make sure that we have enough time for the demo. I realize that I'm going a little longer than I originally anticipated. So for objective statements, so a lot of times, especially on pre-filled formats, there'll be like an objective statement or working history at the top. That's kind of a short sentence on what they do. So for the person who's maybe a career changer, and it's like, hey, I worked as a CNA, but for Adriana's question, now I want to be a business management consultant. That's a very different field to enter into. And the HR person might be like, are you sure you even applied to the right job? Like, this doesn't make any sense to me. That would be a really good space to actually use that career objective, is to write a short sentence or two about why you're making that transition or why you think you're qualified to make that transition. So again, giving them more information. So if there's a question mark in HR person's, trying to answer that question because you know you're not going to be in the room with them. So I would highly recommend a good objective statement. Again, we don't have time to dive into what that and career two kind of things that see at the top of the resume that you look at and know more about that. This is also good to add if you have a really empty resume. So if someone doesn't have a lot of stuff or work experience really at all to put on a resume, just saying, hey, here's a short objective of what I'm trying to do. Here's my skill sets, and using kind of that empty space and filling it out with an objective statement is another way to make the resume look more full when you don't have a lot to put on there. But just keep in mind that this is also an example of the individual's writing skills. So if you're going to put an objective on there, you definitely want to make sure that it showcases good grammar, good English capacity, because a good objective can help, but if it's poorly written or there's spelling mistakes or grammar errors, it will be a representation of that person and it will hurt the perception that HR has of their capacity to communicate in a written and possibly verbal manner. So just know that if you do one of these, make sure that it's well written and reviewed by a number of people for clarity and correctness, because it can significantly impact the reader's perception of the individual. Next slide. Some slides on social media. Basically, act as if the employer is going to look for you on social media. Tell everyone to do a Google search for themselves and see what they find. And if there's anything that would potentially incriminate them, or even look like something like, hey, I was at the beach drinking all of this stuff with my friends, that's one thing. But if thinking about it from an employer is like, do I want to be associated with that picture if they work for me? And kind of thinking of it in that lens when you do that Google search, just thinking of that. And then there's some statistics there, but over half of employers from at least one survey found stuff online that disqualified a candidate based only on what they found on social media. So that footprint can make a difference, and I highly recommend that people double check that. It can be an enlightening experience if you've never done it on yourself before. Next slide. Highly, highly, highly recommend building a LinkedIn profile. Again, if employers are going to look you up on social media anyway, you can send them where you want to go. And LinkedIn is basically kind of, it's simplistically Facebook meets your resume, but you have a social networking aspect to it too. But if employers are going to look you up on social media, why don't you guide them and show them the best part of you that you can? So creating a LinkedIn profile, making a basic profile isn't too difficult. That video is really great and walks you through the steps. And then it allows employers to find that first before finding a bunch of other stuff that maybe you don't want them to see. It also is something that you can put directly on your resume. I have it directly on mine. So when they open up my resume, they can just click my LinkedIn and they can go directly to it. And so highly, highly recommend that as well, especially as we get more online. It's only going to be more and more important as time goes on. I'm just going to answer Gina's question. So for a student who has no kind of experience or really involvement, what should they put on their resume? That's where I think there's a couple different other things like a functional resume, where you just take what they have done as much as possible and just try to showcase the skills that they've acquired. So maybe they never did anything formal, but maybe they're the oldest child and they have three younger siblings and they're responsible for, you know, some childcare activities. What are some skills that might overlap with what they're trying to apply for that you can pull out of those experiences? You know, are they involved with anything with an organization or a church or something like that? And just try to glean what I would call transferable skills that can apply in multiple situations like time management or communication skills or you know, maybe they've helped volunteer to fix something in someone's backyard like a project or something like that, and just taking those skill sets and trying to highlight that in the context as best as you're able. But also, unfortunate reality is they might need to go out and find opportunities to get that experience, even if it's volunteer. I know that that favors certain kinds of individuals who have the capacity to do that more than others. But especially if you're trying to break into a new career field or something like that, a lot of times you have to kind of do some freelance work or some volunteer or some studying on your own to prove that you can at least do the bare basics of that kind of thing to put on that resume before an employer will kind of give you a second look. So that's the best way I can answer that without diving deeply into a specific scenario. Next slide. And then I will hand it off to Daniel. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them as we go on through the chat. I'll answer them as best we can. But Daniel has a really cool tool that I've used before taking this job, and hand it off to him.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Jordan. Just want to say hello to everyone and thank you for joining us today. My name is Daniel Mariscal. I am with Illinois WorkNet. I've been with the organization a little over 4 years now. Today, as Jordan said, we are going to walk through the account creation and access process on Illinois WorkNet. We're also going to take a glance at the Skills First platform, and then we're going to do a sample resume build as well. So if you have any questions throughout this process, please feel free to throw them in the Q&A, and I will do my best to answer them as appropriate. All right, everyone. So what you can see here is the Illinois WorkNet homepage. How to navigate here, as you can see, the URL in the address bar is just illinoisworknet.com. Type that into any major search engine, Google Chrome, Firefox, Edge, etc. Should navigate you right to this page. Now, if you're a first-time user and you are trying to create a login, you want to go ahead and navigate to the upper left-hand portion of the page here, next to the hamburger menu button. You should see a login button. If you click on that, you can click Create Account. And here you'll see you will be redirected to the Illinois WorkNet registration page. Now, As you can see, of course, I'm already a member. But for a first-time user, they'll want to go ahead and fill out any field that has a red asterisk next to it. Once they fill out all of that information that is required, there is a brief terms and conditions clause that you'll see, or disclaimer here at the bottom. Just want to make sure to view those terms and conditions. Once a potential new user has done so, they'll want to make sure to check this checkbox that says accept agreement and click submit. That is all you need to do to create a new WorkNet account. You will also receive an email notification once that account has been confirmed. Again, as you can see here, one of the fields required is an email address. So as long as an individual provides that information, they will be able to create a new account. So we'll navigate back to our home page here. Assuming, of course, we've got a user with a new account, they are logged in. Give me just a moment here. I am now logged into my account. Now, the easiest way for an individual to be able to navigate to the Skills First page is going to be to click on this hamburger menu icon. They go down to the third option that says Qualify for Jobs. There is a resume writing guide that is the fifth option down. So they click on that resume writing guide. It's going to take them to the resume writing guide that we obviously have on Illinois WorkNet. I'm not going to cover every single one of these items that's listed here on the resume writing guide. Just know if you want to navigate through these, there is a quick, handy little hamburger menu icon in the middle of these two arrows that you can see here on this page. Covers all of the topics that you would need to start building a brand new resume. So you could see resume writing intro, getting prepared to write your resume, starting writing, customizing your resume, preparing for an interview, using social media resources, and additional resources on resume writing. So just know this information exists on Illinois WorkNet on the resume writing guide, and that you can look at this, or a potential job seeker can look at this at any time. The main thing that we want to focus in on here today with the additional remaining time that we have is the resume builder. So you can see that hyperlinked right here on the first page of the resume writing guide. So we're going to click on that, and we're going to be redirected to Skills First. Skills First is the third-party app or organization, if you will, software that we use to create resumes and cover letters that we're going to cover here today. There are a ton of features, just full disclosure, ton of features to cover on this Skillsforce platform here today. I'm going to try to keep things simple, stay honed in on just the resume creation process. If we do have a little bit of additional time left, I'll try to get to a references doc, but we'll just have to see, like I said, how far we can get into the resume process here. So to create a new resume, once an individual has got into the Skills First platform, they're going to click the first button that you can see here on the Get Started menu on the right-hand side, Create a Resume. For the purposes of today's demonstration, we're going to start from scratch, but just know that these other two options exist as well. So if an individual does have a pre-existing resume, they can upload that resume and use it to help kind of build out a new resume based on the templates that are available within the platform. They can also edit resume samples that are available within the platform as well. But as I stated, we're going to go ahead and start from scratch here today. And you can see when an individual does that, there are numerous different templates that are pulled up available for an individual to use when crafting their new resume. So I'll just quickly scroll through these. You can see stylistically, there's a ton of different things to choose from. To keep things simple, I'm going to try to select one that's, at least in my estimation, a little bit less busy. Once you click on that template that you want to use, you're going to want to name it. Now, I'm going to go ahead and name this sample resume 2. And then just real quickly here, description's not required, but I'll go ahead and just enter new resume creation for live demo. And with that, once we have officially named our document, well, actually, let me back up. Once we've selected our template, we've named the document, you can now see that we have technically a resume that we can start to build off of. Now, before I actually go into the resume creation process, what I want to go ahead and do is show you this feature that we do currently have available with AI. So I actually pulled a sample job description for a software developer at State Farm. So I tried to pick something within the state of Illinois. I'm going to copy the copy that I have here for the open position. So I'm just going to copy that. And then we're going to click enhance with AI, excuse me. And we're going to click keyword suggestions. Now, what this is going to do is going to generate a list of keywords that an individual can use when crafting their resume. And it's going to tailor it specifically to that job posting or job description that we are getting ready to paste into here. So if we click on that resume keyword suggestions option, we paste that job description in here, and then we click submit. You can see down here, AI has scanned the job description that we do have available here, and it has taken out all of the words that it has deemed as critical keywords that would be good to include in a resume for an individual. And you can see it breaks them down, in this case, by technical skills, specific competencies, relevant experience, job tasks, education, which none were identified within the actual job description itself, some action verbs that can be used when crafting some of those bullet points, employment requirements, not necessarily something we want to highlight too much here, but I do want to draw your attention to the job characteristics at the bottom so you can see a few things that would be important as far as adjectives for individuals that a recruiter might be on the lookout for. So as you can see here, just a really handy, neat, proficient little tool that can be used to help, again, extract those keywords from these job descriptions and allow an individual to really hone in on the keywords when they are formulating their new resume. So I'm going to go back now. And you can see we have this blank template here for the resume. To add sections to a resume, what we're going to want to go ahead and do is click Edit. You can see here we have the ability to add sections. So once we click on that, there is a drop-down menu that you can see. And here are all of the different options that we have to add to our resume. Now, for the purposes of today's session, I am going to go ahead and add a objective and or a personal statement. I'm also going to select education, experience or work experience, projects, and skills. All right. So you can see here now, we have the tabs that are going to make up our resume. So in this case, I've actually got a sample resume here off screen that I'm just going to be copying and pasting to make things a little bit quicker for us today. But of course, for a job seeker using this platform for the first time, they're going to want to be inputting their own personal information into these fields. I'm going to omit a headline, but in keeping with what Jordan said, I'm actually going to add a faux LinkedIn account here. And I'm also going to add for this individual, since this job description is for a software developer, I'm going to add a faux GitHub repository here as well. And then I'm going to click save. So once we've done that, that has saved the initial portion of our resume. Now, to preview the resume in its entirety, as you're filling each of these tabs out, you can stop at any time and click this preview button that's over to the right-hand side. So if we click on that, you can see right now all that information that I just input into the top for our resume is now following that same exact format of the template that we selected when we created this new resume. So you can see all that information housed here. And you can also see, even though we haven't filled in each of these respective sections yet, you can see that they have been added to the resume. So just keep that in mind. Also, another quick thing to keep in mind here as well is that you do have the ability to reorder sections as well. To do that, just click on that option and you can move these up and down to the preference that you would like to follow. So in this case, what I'll do is just swap skills and projects just so you can see what that looks like. So as you can see, when we swap those sections, skills is now before projects. For the purposes of this demo, I'm actually going to put our projects above the skills. All right, so this is back to the original format that we had. But just know, again, any of these sections can be reordered to your preference. So very quickly, I'm going to insert some of this faux information that I've got here in my sample resume, just so we can see what this looks like. So we're going to move next to our objectives. Now we do have some options here that AI can use, or that can be used in tandem with AI, excuse me, where we can optimize job descriptions. We can also provide examples. For now, I'm going to just include the information that I have for demonstration purposes here, excuse me. We're actually going to start with education, my apologies. So I just typed in, again, faux data using the University of XYZ, as you can see. I will just put the location as Chicago, and then the area or degree of study, I'm going to select a bachelor's in computer science. Now for the date, as you can see here, I'm just going to enter in a date that can be used to demonstrate this. And some information that was also included in the faux resume I have here, I'm going to throw into the description. I'm going to save this. And again, real quick, I'll preview it so you can see what this looks like on our resume. So you can see now under our education section here, we've got our university, the location, when this individual graduated, what they graduated with as far as a degree path, and then some of the relevant coursework that they took in regards to the job description that's currently available. So we're going to continue to move along right here. And we're going to go ahead and add our experience. So real quickly, again, I'm going to take this information from my faux resume, copy and paste it into here. Location. Again, anything that doesn't have a red asterisk next to it you do not need to fill in, but I do want to preface that by saying more information is always better. I'm going to scroll down here and in job title, enter our data here from our sample resume. I'm also going to copy and paste the bullet points from our sample resume here as well. I'm going to go ahead and select a date. And if there's no end date, this is going to show as current on our resume. So I'm going to go ahead and click Save. Then again, if we click our preview button here, you can see under the experience now, we have the title of the job, the name of the company, the location, again, how long they've been working for the organization, our bullet points here. And then at the bottom, it's got just information that is going to be used for setting apart, excuse me, the company that we do have named here. As I stated before, I want to go ahead and add an objective for this individual since this presumably is an individual that is new to the workforce. As Jordan stated, adding that objective statement at the top can really help differentiate an individual within the ATS system, and then of course by the HR recruiters that end up actually looking at the resume. For the objective, again, I'm just going to copy and paste the information from my sample resume that we do have here. That has been saved. We go back to our preview again. You can see our resume is starting to be filled out, following exactly what that template had set aside. And real quickly, I'm going to add some projects and some skills here so you can see what that looks like as well. All right, and very quickly here, going to copy and paste the title of the project. Copy and paste the description. And then I will put just a faux date here so you can see. All right. So if we click save, we now have an example of our project here. And then skills. So I want to make sure to add some skills for this individual as well. So to do that, what I'm going to go ahead and name first is going to be programming languages. One thing to keep in note here when you're adding skills, this program or platform is going to want you to add them piecemeal. So usually what will happen is as you're typing the skill in, it will auto-populate and give you some examples that are currently in the system that you can choose from. In this instance, programming languages we're going to select Python, JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and C++. All right, once we click save, those skills are going to be saved in our resume section now. So if we click preview, we should see a pretty comprehensive resume starting to kind of build itself out, as you can see here. So you can see at the top, we've got our title with the name of the individual, all of the contact information for that individual. We've got our LinkedIn. We've also got their GitHub account repository with any sample projects they may want to share. We've got our objective here, as you can see. And actually, for demonstrative purposes, let me pull up this sample job description that I do have. May be a little bit difficult to see. See if I can expand this a little bit for everyone. So you can see, again, this individual is applying to be a mid or entry-level software engineer. In keeping with some of those keywords that we do have here, we've gone ahead and we've created an objective statement that's in keeping with the job description that we do have here. Education requirements that would be in keeping with a software engineer, software developer, and relevant coursework that pertains thereto. Under that, experience that would be relevant to the software developer position that we do have here. And additionally, as you can see, definitely, especially within the space of IT, software development, engineering, etc., having projects that can really demonstrate competencies or core competencies, if you will, and skills and abilities to be able to hit the ground running on that first day, as Jordan already alluded to, is going to be a huge win for a potential new job seeker trying to land that first interview and ultimately get landed the job as well. Last but not least, you're going to definitely want to highlight skills. In this case, if we're assuming a software developer, software engineer, of course, there's going to be an expectation that that individual is going to possess a baseline amount of knowledge as far as programming languages are concerned. This resume reflects that information as well. So one thing that I want to show here, now that we've got our sample resume together, again, I know I moved through that a little bit quickly. We're going to do a quick resume readiness check. Now, this is also going to be handled by AI as well. And what this is going to do is it's going to review the resume, make sure that that resume is polished and that it is submission ready. So if we click on resume readiness check, it's going to redact personally identifiable information, or PII, which is been kind of a hotbed issue within artificial intelligence and personal information being uploaded to it. You can see here, if we run GPT analysis, it's going to review our resume, and it is going to give us examples as to how we might be able to improve this resume before we submit. So you can see here, came back with a score. In this case, excellent. It's saying our resume is in very good shape. We only have minor tweaks that we can make to the document before we go ahead and submit. So you can see that this resume readiness check feature checks for spelling accuracy. In this case, thankfully, we don't have any spelling errors. Likewise, grammar accuracy is all set and good to go as well. As far as section completeness is concerned, again, I know we didn't add necessarily a whole lot of experience, but for demonstration purposes, you can see here, this section is considered complete. Bullet point structure is good. And you can see here, it meets the criteria for action verbs. So we have a good variety of different action verbs that are going to attract the attention of not only ATS, but the HR recruiters as a whole. Quantifiable achievements, we do have a few of those in here, and you can see that the artificial intelligence system here that scanned that did pick that up here. It is suggesting, as you can see, to try to include more quantifiable achievements if possible, just to further demonstrate some of that impact that this individual made in their previous roles. It even does a word count, as you can see here. So it tells us word count is currently 308 words. It tells us that the ideal range for a resume is between 400 to 600 words, totally in keeping with the document that we have here today, right, as a demo. But for an individual actually building this out, one would assume, of course, that they've got a lot more experience. They'll be adding by way of bullet points to the document. That's going to increase that word count significantly. Numerical data, it's also scanning for that as well. So you can see that at least in this tool's estimation, it's saying that the resume currently includes numbers effectively. It would like to see some more details regarding project budgets, timelines, or results that could highlight the scope of past work that's been taking place. So again, kind of in keeping with the quantifiable achievements, the more we can add to these resumes, excuse me, as Jordan stated, the better. Last but not least, you can see vocabulary diversity. This tool likes that the use of different words that we've used here. It's essentially stating that the document itself has not become too repetitive. And we could assume, obviously, that's going to translate to an ATS system or an HR rep. They're not going to just be reading the first few lines. It's not going to be repetitive. It's going to keep them engaged and make sure that they're reading that resume from start to finish. And then you can see here as a final note, it's going to give you some final recommendations before you submit. Again, in this tool's estimation, it's saying that our resume is strong and ready for next steps. Few things that we've highlighted here to enhance it. Obviously, quantifiable achievements are going to be big in this example specifically. Obviously, word count as well. We'll want to make sure that we're hitting that ideal 400 to 600 word range. And you can see here at the bottom, it's telling you essentially that same thing. And it's even telling you right here, keep up the great work as you transition into software development roles. So it is taking that resume that we've created here, it's scanning it in real time, it's extracting all of the pertinent information from it and trying to give us quantifiable feedback that we can actually use to improve our resume before we submit. So super neat tool that I want to draw your attention to that folks can use as they're creating their resumes within the Skills First platform. I'm going to take a brief pause here. I'm going to grab a drink, and then I'm also going to see what questions that we might have.
It looks like most of the questions in the Q&A have been answered.
Awesome.
And then Adriana is thanking everyone for it. Thanking Jordan for answering the questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. All right, so I'm going to take a brief pause here to see if there's any additional questions that you have over the resume creation process. If anyone has any, please feel free to throw them into the Q&A. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you do have. In the meantime, I want to be able to show you how an individual might be able to share a resume once it's been created. So the easiest way to do so within this platform, once we're back on this kind of main page, if you will, for this resume, there is a share button that you can see here, probably similar to a lot of share buttons that you've seen on other websites when you're sharing an article or document, etc. So here you do have the option within the platform to share with an organization, specific people, or anybody with a link. In this case, for a regular job seeker, what would probably be appropriate would be anybody with a link. I would also set this to viewer, because if we set this to editor or reviewer, of course, we send this link out, an individual who might have, let's say, malicious intent or something similar would have the ability to come in to the platform, or not the platform, excuse me, to the resume, and would be able to make edits to the resume without the permission of that individual. So we want to make sure that that viewer option is checked. Permissions, anybody with a link, and then we can copy this link and paste it as we see fit. One thing that I want to note here is back here, if we go back to our dashboard, you can see now for our personal galleries, we now have our resume stored here in our own personal account that we can always go back to and retrieve. So if I click on that, you could see I had a sample resume that I worked on yesterday for prep for this presentation here today. Sample resume 2 has been saved here automatically as well. To be able to access that, we'll just click on that resume and you can see it's saved our resume. We have the ability here also to download the document. So if we want a standalone resume as well, you can see here, we have the option to download it as a docx format. So once this resume is created, an individual is more than welcome to download that, add it to a thumb drive, add it to a Google Docs, etc., to where it can be shared as they see fit as well. So with that, I'm going to take a pause here, see if there's any additional questions. Jordan, I don't know if you have any questions or there's anything that you would like to add to the
Could
program.
you
Feel free.
could you just show them how to download it as a PDF too? I think it's the three dots.
Yep. So we also have the option here, as you can see, to download as a PDF. So if we click on that, you can see here that has downloaded. And you can see we have our PDF version of our resume right here.
There's also a question on the Q&A from Jody. Within Skills First, is there a resume optimizer that incorporates the job description similar to an ATS simulator like JobScan?
So my understanding is you're stating if we could put the job description into the AI feature and that it would automatically upload it into the resume.
I think that's what I'm understanding. Jody, if the question is different than that, you can raise your hand. We can unmute you.
I don't believe, and Jordan, if you're aware of the ability to do so, let me know. But I don't believe that the platform currently has the capacity to do that. The three features that we do have are the resume readiness check, keyword suggestions, and then a skills gap analysis. What that's going to do, I didn't demo that here today. What that's going to do is just tell you, it's going to scan the resume here and it's going to tell you where skills gaps lie and where things could be shored up before submitting a resume. But there is currently no feature that's going to automatically take the job description, parse that information, and upload it into the resume automatically. That's going to still be up to the job seeker or the individual creating the resume to do so.
I'm not aware of anything. And then I was typing some Q&A stuff. When you were going over the job experience for the specific job role, did you walk through kind of the auto-generated task prompts for bullets when you have that form field up?
Yeah, so I can do that
Okay.
real quick.
Okay, yeah, I was spaced out for a minute, so I just want to
You're
make
no
sure
worries.
that that was covered.
No worries, but you know what? I'll go ahead and show it real quick here with the last thing that we do have. So if we do go to experience here, we click edit job. You can see we do have the option to optimize some of these job descriptions that you see, and there are examples as well. So if we click to optimize,
I just find this tool very helpful for people who aren't sure where to start. It's a pretty good baseline of using those examples. It's kind of like a framework for what they can add to their own resume experience.
so you can see here, this is going to tell you some different variations that can be used based off the bullet points that you've entered. So lots of actually really good examples here. As you can see, the tool is automatically suggesting how you might be able to quantify some of these. So you could see bullet point 1. It's already wanting to quantify this, saying that it resulted in a 30% increase in actionable insights. As you can see now, it's still going to be up to the job seeker, of course, to make sure that that information that's quantifiable is accurate, right? This is just providing an example of how a job seeker might be able to phrase some of this information, but the onus is still going to be on them to make sure that these numbers are accurate. But as you can see, the tool does a very good job on elaborating on each of these points, quantifying these points to really kind of drill and drive home, what this individual did. And actually, I would argue that the bullet points that it's providing here are probably more compelling than the ones that we have on our sample kind of dummy resume that we do have here. And you can see there's even an option here at the bottom, alternatives for crafting data-driven narratives, right? So if a job seeker is trying to put together a compelling or craft a compelling narrative for a potential employer, this tool even has a feature where you can see it's pulling in information about in this case, Forbes, CNBC, Harvard Business Review, um, drawing in similar topics to what's being covered in the resume and how it might be able to, again, just kind of craft or create that more compelling narrative. So as you can see, really, we need a ton of time really to cover the full capacity of the tool and the abilities that are at the fingertips of the job seeker here. But you can see if leveraged properly, this is an extremely, extremely powerful tool to create a standout resume from scratch in a single location, right? This individual is not having to go find original, resume templates. They're not having to scrape through the internet to try to find bullet points or action verbs or what have you that might be interesting. It's all housed singly within this tool.
And I hate to interrupt, but we are at time. We have one person that has raised her hand. I'm actually going to drop my email in the chat so that you can reach out to me afterwards. I'm happy to forward the question to the speakers. But I say that we wrap up and look at the resources. Are we okay with moving to that?
Yep.
Yep.
All right. Perfect. I'm going to share my screen again. All right.
So Daniel, if you want to I'll just go ahead and take it since we're on time. So there's a webinar that Daniel, I think, and his team has already done on this tool, highlighting all the different things you can do on the platform in addition to what we've already covered today. The link to the skills first login is on here. Walk through on how to make the WorkNet account for someone who doesn't already have one. And yes, those I can still access resumes I made 3 years ago or 2 years ago on this platform. They're still there, which is great because I can access it on the cloud. It doesn't matter what computer I'm at. If I have internet access, I can get those. And then the resume writing guide, which covers a lot of what we covered today. The additional resource links I put also in the chat for the GCF Global. It's great for people who are brand new, I would say, adult learners, immigrant populations. It would be a really good tool on the next resource slide. And then the rest are just article links I've collected over the years. Feel free to peruse them if this subject interests you. And then, me or Daniel can answer. We'll reach out to you, Luz, with your question and get that answered as well.
All right. And I'm so sorry that I had to cut that short, but all of these links are going to be available on the Illinois Workforce Academy. I will put that in the chat. There's a webinar section that includes all of these recordings. If you want to watch a previous one, it includes all of our slides. Once again, if you would like to reach out to us, please feel free to reach out to me. I have my email in the chat, and I will forward you to any of the speakers. We're happy to take some of these questions offline. Is there any final comment that we want to say before we log off?
Good.
No, just want to say thank you to everyone who joined today, and thank you to those who facilitated. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Awesome.
everyone.
Thank you so much, Jordan. Thank you so much, Daniel. And everybody have a wonderful day.